I didn't know the bank manager's face could turn that particular shade of white until she looked at the computer screen and then looked at me. Sitting there in my soft pink bathrobe worn thin at the elbows, my daughter gripping my hand like she was afraid I might float away. The woman's lips moved, but I couldn't hear anything over the roaring in my ears. The office suddenly felt too small, the air conditioning too cold against my skin, the fluorescent lights too bright. I could smell my own fear, sharp and metallic, mixing with my daughter's perfume and the manager's coffee breath as she leaned forward. Then she said it again, louder this time, enunciating each syllable like she was speaking to someone who didn't understand English. $1.2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. I felt it in my chest first, then spreading out to my fingertips, making them numb. My vision tunneled. I could see the manager's mouth still moving, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat, thundering so loud I thought everyone in the bank must be able to hear it. $1.2 million. My uncle's retirement account, with my name on it. The same uncle I'd thought died with nothing. The same uncle whose funeral I'd paid for with a credit card I couldn't afford, choosing the cheapest casket because I assumed that's all he would have wanted. $1.2 million that had been sitting there, growing, waiting for this exact moment when I needed it most. The room tilted sideways and my daughter caught me before I hit the floor, both of us crying so hard the security guard opened the door to check if we were okay. I could feel her hands shaking as they gripped my shoulders, could hear her voice breaking as she kept saying, "Mama, Mama," over and over. The manager pushed a box of tissues across her desk, but neither of us could reach for them. We just held on to each other and sobbed like something had been ripped out of us, or maybe put back in. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to 3 weeks before that moment, when I was still convinced I'd be homeless by the end of the month. It was a Tuesday morning in Birmingham, Alabama, and I was going through old photos in a shoebox from the closet. I do that sometimes when I can't sleep, which is most nights now. I'm 41 years old, and I should be in the prime of my life, but instead I'm living in a mobile home in a quiet park with a wooden deck, 3 months behind on lot rent, with an eviction notice stuck to my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a magnolia flower. The summer heat makes everything slow down, and the fan spins all day, stirring the thick air but never really cooling anything. Outside, the mixed-income area with older homes near downtown stretches out in every direction, full of people who have no idea that the woman in Lot 47 is about to lose everything for the second time in 2 years. The photos in my hands were from better days. Me and my uncle at my high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders, his smile proud but restrained. I remembered that day. He'd taken off work, losing a day's pay to watch me walk across that stage. He'd worn his best shirt, the one without any stains, and he'd brought me a single rose wrapped in grocery store paper. My friends had gotten bouquets. I'd gotten one rose from a man who could barely afford it. At the time, I'd been embarrassed. Now, holding this photo, I understood what that rose had cost him. Me and my son when he was 5, gap-toothed and grinning, before everything went wrong. Or maybe it had always been wrong, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. My uncle had seen it. Even when my son was small, Uncle James would watch him with this careful expression, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "That boy's got a calculating way about him," he'd said once. I'd gotten angry, defended my child, told my uncle he was being unfair. We didn't speak for a month after that argument, my mother before the cancer looking young and hopeful in a way I'd never seen her in person. By the time I was old enough to remember her clearly, life had already worn her down. My uncle had stepped in when she couldn't, had raised me more than she ever did. I used to resent him for it, for being the one who showed up when my own mother couldn't. Now I understood. Showing up is everything. I set them down next to the half-eaten banana pudding layered with vanilla wafers on my coffee table. I'd made it 2 days ago and kept picking at it, the only thing that still tasted like comfort. The vanilla wafers had gone soft, the way they're supposed to, the way my mother used to make it. Each bite was memory and sadness mixed together until I couldn't tell which was which. On my nightstand sat my worn Bible, open to Psalms, stuck on the same passage for weeks because I couldn't bring myself to pray anymore. The pages were thin from use. The binding cracked. Certain verses underlined so many times the ink had bled through. How do you pray when your own child has stolen your future? How do you ask God for help when the person who hurt you most is someone you once held against your chest? Someone whose first word was, "Mama?" Above the television sat his favorite Bible with passages he underlined in red ink. My uncle's Bible. The only thing I kept when he died 18 months ago. Just 18 months, still fresh enough to hurt every day. I could still hear his voice sometimes, especially when I looked at those underlined passages. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He'd underlined it 3 times, the red ink so thick it bled through to the next page. I wondered if he knew even then what was coming for me. My phone buzzed, a text from my daughter-in-law. Thinking of you hard times, but God provides. We're praying for you. I stared at those words until they blurred. This from the woman who stood beside my son while he emptied my bank accounts, refinanced my house without my knowledge, took out credit cards in my name while I recovered from my hysterectomy. This from the woman who smiled her church smile and told me not to worry about money while I healed, while her husband was systematically destroying everything I'd spent 25 years building. The betrayal was complete. Financial theft, diversion of funds, hidden debt that appeared out of nowhere. My son had power of attorney for what was supposed to be a 6-week recovery. Somehow, that turned into 18 months of him controlling everything. By the time I was strong enough to check the accounts myself, I owned nothing but debt. The house I'd bought with my first real job, gone to foreclosure. The savings account I'd opened when I was 16 years old, emptied down to 37 cents. Credit cards I never applied for, maxed out and past due. All of it legal. Technically because I'd signed that power of attorney form before they wheeled me into surgery. I reported it everywhere. Police, Adult Protective Services, the district attorney's office. They all said the same thing, in slightly different words. Family financial matters are complicated. Power of attorney makes prosecution difficult. Civil court is expensive and slow. And don't you think your son was just trying to help? The system that was supposed to protect people like me just shrugged and moved on to the next case. That's how I ended up here, in a mobile home I can't afford, eating 2-day-old pudding and trying to figure out which of my belongings I could sell before the eviction. 2 weeks to come up with $4,800. I had $212 in my checking account and a shelf full of dishes from the dollar store. The math wasn't hard. I thought about my uncle constantly now. We had a complicated but loving relationship. He was my uncle, who stepped in when my father walked out, and he raised me more than my mother did, but we argued about everything. I was too stubborn, he said, too proud, too quick to trust the wrong people. Our last argument was about my son. Uncle James didn't trust him, said there was something cold in the boy's eyes. I defended my child. We didn't speak for 2 months. Then his heart gave out in the middle of his shift at the plastics factory where he'd worked for 37 years. He died with nothing, I thought. A rented room in a boarding house. A car held together with duct tape and prayer. 3 shirts he rotated through, washed by hand in his bathroom sink. He could have had more. Should have had more. But he lived like a monk, and I never understood why. What was the point of working your whole life if you died with nothing to show for it? I picked up his Bible and opened it at random. His handwriting in the margins, notes to himself about faith and perseverance. A receipt tucked between pages from 1998 for a burger and fries. $3.47. I remembered that day. We'd gone to lunch after another argument, made up over cheap food and sweet tea. He paid with exact change from a jar he kept in his glove compartment. The eviction notice on my refrigerator seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. 14 days. Then the sheriff would come and everything I had left would be piled on the curb. At 41 years old, I'd be homeless. My daughter offered to take me in, but she had 3 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. My sister lived 4 states away and hadn't returned my calls in 6 months. There was nowhere to go and no way to stop what was coming. I thought about calling my son, begging. Maybe if I got on my knees and apologized for being angry about him stealing everything I owned, he'd help me. Maybe his wife would smile that church smile and write me a check for just enough to keep me off the streets. The thought made me sick, but desperation does that. It makes you consider things that should be unthinkable. Instead, I called the leasing office and asked for an extension. The woman who answered sounded tired. She said she was sorry, but I'd already had 2 extensions and the owner wouldn't approve another one. I said I understood. I didn't cry until after I hung up. Then I cried until my ribs hurt and my eyes swelled shut. That's when my daughter showed up unannounced, with 2 boxes of her own. She was helping me pack, she said, to make it easier when the time came. We'd get through this together, she said. I loved her for trying, but we both knew the truth. There was no getting through this. There was only the falling. The bank revelation started with my daughter going through my mother's jewelry box, sorting costume pieces to donate to Goodwill. Most of it was worthless, rhinestones and painted metal, the kind of jewelry my mother wore to church because she couldn't afford anything real. Necklaces that turned skin green, earrings with missing backs, a brooch shaped like a butterfly with half its wings broken off. The detritus of a life lived without luxury. My daughter was about to dump it all in a trash bag when something fell out and hit the floor with a small metallic ping. The sound was distinct, different from the plastic clatter of costume jewelry. We both froze. A key, small, brass, with a number stamped on it and a bank name I didn't recognize. We both stared at it like it had fallen from another dimension. It sat there on the worn carpet, catching the afternoon light coming through the window, looking impossibly important. "What is that?" my daughter whispered, like speaking too loud might make it disappear. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The brass was tarnished, old, probably sitting in that jewelry box for years without anyone noticing. The number stamped on it was 847. The bank name was First Security Downtown, a place I'd driven past thousands of times without ever thinking about. My mother had banked at a different institution, a small credit union near her apartment. Why would she have a key to a bank she didn't use? Unless it wasn't her key. Unless someone had given it to her to hold. Someone like my uncle, who didn't trust banks enough to keep his own key, who might have asked his sister to hide it somewhere safe. "Mama," my daughter said slowly, "did Grandma have a safe deposit box?" I had no idea. My mother died 6 years ago and left nothing but medical bills and grief. But the key was real, and the bank was still in business. A branch downtown that I'd driven past 1,000 times without ever going inside. We looked at each other and something passed between us. Hope, maybe. Or just the desperate need to believe that somewhere, somehow, there was a door that wasn't locked against us. We went that afternoon. I didn't even change out of my bathrobe, just threw on jeans underneath and a t-shirt over it, pulled my hair into a ponytail, and drove downtown with my daughter beside me, both of us silent. What do you say when you're chasing a mystery that probably leads to nothing? When you're so broke that a stranger's dropped penny on the sidewalk makes you calculate whether it's worth bending over? The bank was bigger than I expected. Marble floors, high ceilings, the kind of place that makes you feel small and poor just by walking through the doors. My daughter held my hand like I was the child and she was the mother. We approached the counter, and I held out the key with shaking fingers. The woman behind the counter took it, scanned it, and her expression changed. She looked at me, looked at the screen, looked at me again. Then she picked up her phone and made a call in a voice too low for me to hear. Within 2 minutes, 3 people in suits appeared and escorted us to a private office like we were visiting dignitaries instead of a broke woman in a bathrobe and her scared daughter. That's when the manager came in, a woman in a gray suit with kind eyes and a mouth that kept opening and closing like she didn't know how to say what she needed to say. She verified my identity 3 times: driver's license, social security card, a utility bill with my address. She kept glancing at her colleagues like she was afraid to tell me what she'd found. Finally, she slid a paper across the desk. Her hands were shaking too. I looked down at the paper and the words swam. Retirement account, emergency contact and heir. Established 1991. My uncle's name at the top. And at the bottom, a number that made my vision blur and my lungs forget how to work. $1.2 million. 30 years of contributions he never touched. Compound interest. Employer matches. Investment growth. Money he could have used to buy a house, a decent car, clothes that weren't threadbare. Money he lived without so that someday, when I needed it most, I'd have it. And that's when I collapsed in that chair and my daughter caught me, and we both sobbed so hard the security guard opened the door to check if someone had died. In a way, someone had. The version of me who thought she was completely alone in the world died in that moment. The version who thought her uncle had left her with nothing but a Bible and memories died. And something new was born, something I didn't have words for yet. Grief and gratitude so tangled together, I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The manager gave us privacy while we cried. When we could breathe again, she explained the details. My uncle had opened the account the year I graduated high school. He'd never made a withdrawal. The money had grown, untouched, for 3 decades. And he'd listed me as the sole beneficiary, with instructions that the account information should only be released to me directly, in person, with proper identification. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known I would need this. That I would hit bottom and need to know I wasn't forgotten. Your stories matter. If this one is reaching you, share it. Someone else needs to hear it too. Someone else is alone in the dark, thinking nobody cares, and they need to know that love doesn't end just because someone dies. We spent 3 weeks doing paperwork, verification forms, beneficiary claims, tax documents, transfer requests. 3 weeks of lawyers and notaries and certified mail. 3 weeks of me waking up every morning convinced it had been a dream, that the bank would call and say they'd made a mistake, that the money belonged to someone else. But the calls never came. The money was real. My uncle's love was real. His protection from beyond the grave was real. And that's when my son and daughter-in-law showed up at my door. I was packing the mobile home, getting ready to move somewhere, anywhere that didn't carry the stink of eviction and defeat. Cardboard boxes sat half-filled around the living room, my life sorted into categories: keep, donate, throw away. I was wrapping dishes in newspaper when I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps, confident, entitled, the kind of knock that assumes it will be answered. I froze with a plate in my hand, newspaper ink staining my fingers black. I knew that knock, had heard it 1,000 times growing up, my son's particular rhythm. He'd always knocked like he owned whatever door he was knocking on. For a moment, I considered not answering, pretending I wasn't home. But their car was in the driveway and the windows were open, fan whirring. They knew I was here. I set down the plate carefully and walked to the door, my heart pounding. Opened it, and there they stood, my son and the woman he married, both of them wearing expressions of concern that made my stomach turn. Concern that didn't reach their eyes. Concern that looked practiced, rehearsed, like they'd talked about what faces to make before they drove over. My son had gained weight. He looked prosperous, well-fed, wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly lot rent. His wife stood slightly behind him, her hand on his arm, a gesture of unity that felt calculated. She wore a cross necklace, prominent against her chest, The kind you wear when you want people to know you're a good Christian woman. Mom? My son said, and just that one word made me flinch. He hadn't called me Mom in months. It had been Mother in legal documents and silence everywhere else. We heard about Uncle James's account. That's wonderful news. We're so happy for you. Happy for me. The word sat in the air between us like smoke. I wondered who had told them. The bank was supposed to be confidential. But money has a way of creating its own communication network. Someone knew someone who knew someone. In a city like Birmingham, secrets don't stay secret for long, especially secrets about sudden wealth. I just stared at him. This man I'd given birth to after 18 hours of labor, nursed through fevers and nightmares, taught to read with flashcards at the kitchen table, loved with every cell in my body even when he made it hard. This man who'd stolen everything I had while I was recovering from surgery, my body cut open and stapled back together, too weak to walk to the bathroom alone. This man who'd sat beside my hospital bed and held my hand and promised to take care of everything. This man who hadn't called in 6 months except to ask if I'd signed the deed transfer papers yet, so he could sell my foreclosed house and keep the proceeds. I looked into his eyes and saw a stranger. Or maybe I finally saw him clearly for the first time. His wife stepped forward, all concern and church smile, the same smile she wore when greeting people at Sunday service. We know things have been hard between us, but that's all in the past now. What matters is family. We want to help you manage this money. Make sure you don't make any mistakes. You've been through so much, and financial decisions can be overwhelming, especially for someone in your state of mind. My state of mind. There it was. The implication that I was too traumatized, too emotional, too damaged to think clearly. The same argument they'd used before, the same words that had convinced me to sign over power of attorney. You're in no condition to handle these things. Let us help you. That's what family does. Manage my money. Make sure I don't make mistakes. The same words she'd used 2 years ago when I was too weak to argue, when they'd convinced me to sign over control of everything, when they'd promised to take care of me and instead had taken everything. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. Tried to find the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. But all I saw was a stranger with cold eyes and practiced words. My uncle had been right. He'd seen it years ago, and I'd been too blind to listen. No, I said, just that one word. My daughter-in-law's smile flickered. Mom, we're just trying to help. You've been through trauma, and trauma affects judgment. We don't want you to be taken advantage of. The laugh that came out of me sounded wrong, sharp and bitter. Taken advantage of? You mean like when you refinanced my house and kept the cash? Like when you opened credit cards in my name while I was unconscious from anesthesia? Like when you diverted my disability checks for 1.5 years? My son had the decency to look uncomfortable. His wife's smile vanished completely. We were managing your affairs during your recovery. Everything we did was legal. You gave us power of attorney. You're right, I said. It was legal. Just like it's legal for me to close this door and never speak to either of you again. And I did. I closed the door in their faces and locked it and stood there shaking while they knocked and called my name. Eventually, they left. Eventually, the sound of their car engine faded into the distance. Eventually, I could breathe again. I slid down to the floor with my back against the door and cried. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't crying because I was broken. I was crying because I was free. Free from needing them. Free from hoping they'd apologize or change or become the people I wish they were. Free from the prison of waiting for love from people who'd proven they didn't know how to give it. My uncle had given me that freedom, not just with money, but with proof. Proof that I was worth protecting, worth planning for, worth loving even when I was difficult and stubborn and wrong. He'd argued with me about my son because he could see what I couldn't. And even when I chose my son over him, even when we didn't speak for 2 months before his death, he'd still made sure I'd survive. That's what love looks like. Not the performance of it. The proof. I pulled myself up off the floor and went to the shelf where his Bible sat, opened it to one of his underlined passages. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. In the margin, in his handwriting, a note to himself. Walked through, not stayed in. Keep moving. Keep moving. I could do that. I would do that. The phone call came 2 days later from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Debt collectors had my number, and I'd gotten good at ignoring unknown calls. The phone sat on the coffee table, buzzing and dancing across the surface, the unknown number glowing on the screen. I stared at it, weighing the odds. 99 times out of 100, unknown numbers meant bad news. Collection agencies, scammers, automated voices telling me my car warranty was about to expire on a car I didn't own. But something made me pick up. Maybe it was the way the call came exactly 2 days after I'd closed the door on my son. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just that I was tired of being afraid of my own phone. Is this Sarah? A man's voice, familiar, but I couldn't place it. Deep, careful, like he was choosing his words before he spoke them. Who's asking? I kept my voice flat, neutral. I'd learned not to give anything away until I knew who I was talking to. It's Marcus, your daughter-in-law's ex-husband. My hand tightened on the phone. Marcus. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since before the divorce. Maybe once or twice at holiday gatherings before things got ugly, brief exchanges about weather and football. I'd barely known him. My son had made sure of that, had kept Marcus at a distance, had always positioned himself as the barrier between his new stepchildren and their biological father. What do you want? I asked, not bothering to hide the suspicion in my voice. In my experience, when someone from your daughter-in-law's past called you out of the blue, it wasn't to wish you well. I sat down slowly. Marcus. The man my daughter-in-law had dragged through a vicious divorce 5 years ago. The man she'd accused of everything short of murder to get full custody of their kids. The man I'd never liked because my son had never liked him, and I'd trusted my son's judgment. God help me, I'd trusted my son. What do you want? I asked, not bothering to hide the suspicion in my voice. I heard what they did to you, taking your money, your house, leaving you with nothing while you recovered from surgery. He paused. My mother. She did the same thing to my mother. That's why we really got divorced, not the reasons she told the court. I found out she'd been stealing from my mom, moving money out of her accounts, forging signatures. When I confronted her, she threatened to destroy me in the divorce if I said anything. So I stayed quiet to protect my kids, and she destroyed me anyway. I couldn't speak. All those years of believing his ex-wife's version of events. All those years of thinking he was the villain in that story. I should have warned you, he said quietly. When your son started dating her, I should have told you what kind of person she was. But I was afraid. Afraid she'd keep my kids from me. Afraid no one would believe me. I'm sorry. Why are you calling me now? Because I know a lawyer, specializes in financial elder abuse. He's good, expensive, and he wins cases that look impossible. I already talked to him about your situation. He'll take you on, and I'll pay the retainer. Why would you do that? Because I couldn't protect my mother, but maybe I can help you. Maybe I can do one thing right. His voice cracked. She died thinking I didn't care. Died thinking I chose my ex-wife over her. That's something I have to live with. But I don't have to live with letting it happen to someone else. I cried. Again. I seemed to cry constantly now, but these tears were different. They were the kind that wash something clean instead of wearing something away. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me. Just let me help." The lawyer he connected me with was exactly what Marcus had promised: sharp, relentless, and utterly convinced that what my son and daughter-in-law had done was prosecutable despite what the police had said. He filed civil suits, contacted the state attorney general, built a case that made prosecutors take a second look. I don't know if anything will come of it. The system is still slow, still complicated, still designed to protect families even when families are the ones doing harm. But at least someone is fighting for me now. At least someone with power and credentials believes me. Marcus and I started talking regularly. Not as friends exactly. More like soldiers who'd survived the same war. Late-night phone calls that stretched for hours. Coffee meetings at diners where we could talk without being overheard. Conversations that started with legal strategy and ended with tears. He told me about his mother, how she'd died in a state facility with nothing, convinced her family had abandoned her. How he'd visited every week but she'd stopped recognizing him toward the end. The dementia stealing even the memory of his face. How his ex-wife had isolated her, slowly, methodically, until his mother believed the lies more than she believed him. How he'd found out after she died that there had been money, quite a bit of it, all of it gone into accounts he couldn't trace. How the state investigator had shrugged and said without hard evidence, there was nothing they could do. The worst part, he said during one of our late-night calls, his voice rough with old pain, wasn't losing the money. It was knowing she died thinking I didn't care, that I'd abandoned her. That's what my ex told her, apparently, that I was too busy with my new life to visit, even though I was there every Sunday. Mom's mind was going and she believed it. She believed I'd left her. I told him about my uncle, how he'd died with nothing visible but left everything that mattered. How we'd argued about my son and I'd been too stubborn to listen. How he'd seen the truth and I'd chosen blindness. How he'd protected me anyway, even after I'd pushed him away. How I'd never gotten to thank him, never gotten to say I was sorry, never gotten to tell him he was right. That's the difference, Marcus said quietly. Your uncle loved you enough to protect you even when you couldn't see it. My mother loved me but couldn't protect herself, and we both loved people who took advantage of that love. We traded stories of betrayal and survival, of the particular pain that comes from being hurt by people you're supposed to trust. The way it changes you. Makes you question every relationship. Makes you wonder if you're the problem, if there's something wrong with you that attracts predators. Makes you afraid to trust anyone ever again. But slowly, carefully, we started to trust each other. Not because we had to, because we chose to.
You're one of the lucky ones, Marcus said during one of our calls. Most people in your situation never find that hidden account. Never get the proof that someone was looking out for them. They just die broke and broken, thinking nobody cared. He was right. I was lucky. But it wasn't the money that made me lucky. It was my uncle. It was having someone who loved me enough to sacrifice his own comfort for my future security. Someone who saw me clearly, argued with me honestly, and protected me anyway. I started making plans. Real plans. Not the desperate survival calculations I'd been doing for 2 years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could think past next week, past next month. I could think in terms of years, of futures, of possibilities that didn't end in eviction or homelessness or worse. I looked at houses near my sister in North Carolina, scrolling through listings late at night, letting myself imagine actually living in these places instead of just surviving in them. A little craftsman with a porch and a garden plot caught my eye. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, hardwood floors that had been refinished, a kitchen with windows overlooking the backyard. A neighborhood with sidewalks and old trees, and the kind of quiet that comes from safety instead of isolation. The realtor showed it to me on a cold November afternoon. My sister came with me, walking through rooms and opening closets and talking about furniture placement like this was something that could actually happen. Like I was someone who could actually own a house again. "The garden's good soil," the realtor said, showing us the backyard. "Previous owner was a serious gardener. You could grow vegetables, flowers, whatever you want." I knelt down and touched the earth. It was cold, dormant for winter, but I could imagine it in spring. Could imagine tomatoes and beans and squash. Could imagine sitting on that porch in the evening, watching things grow, knowing I'd be here long enough to harvest what I planted. "I'll take it," I said. My sister squeezed my shoulder. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. This is it. This is the place where I start over. A place where I could grow old without fear. A place with enough room for my daughter to visit, for my sister's grandkids to spend weekends. A place that felt like the new beginning my uncle had tried to give me. Not just a house, a home. A statement that said I survived. I persevered. I made it through the valley of the shadow of death and came out on the other side. But first, there was something else I needed to do. I drove to the old neighborhood where I grew up, the mixed-income area with older homes near downtown where my uncle had rented his room. I hadn't been back since his funeral, hadn't wanted to see the places that reminded me of him. But now I needed to understand who he'd really been, beyond the arguments and the silences. The boarding house was still there, paint peeling, porch sagging under the weight of too many years and not enough maintenance. I parked across the street and just looked at it for a while. That second window on the right, that had been his room. 10 feet by 12 feet, a hot plate for cooking, a bathroom shared with 3 other tenants. He'd lived there for 15 years, paying $200 a month when he could have afforded more. The plastics factory where he worked was closed now, windows broken, parking lot full of weeds pushing through cracked asphalt. The chain-link fence was rusty, the no trespassing signs sun-faded and hanging crooked. This was where he spent 37 years of his life. 5 days a week, sometimes 6. 8-hour shifts that turned into 10 when they needed overtime. This was the community he never left, even when he could have afforded to move somewhere better. I started asking questions, talking to old-timers who remembered him. The man who ran the corner store. The woman who'd lived in the boarding house room next to his. The foreman who'd worked with him at the factory. And I learned things I'd never known. He'd paid for 3 kids to go to college quietly, through an anonymous scholarship fund at the local high school. Nobody knew it was him, the guidance counselor told me, pulling out old records. He'd mail money orders, always with a note that said, "For someone who wants to learn." We must have sent 20 kids to college over the years with his money. He'd covered rent for families going through hard times. "My husband got laid off back in 2003, an elderly woman told me, crying as she remembered. "We were 3 months behind on rent. I thought we'd be evicted. Then the landlord told me someone had paid our back rent. Wouldn't say who, but I knew. Your uncle was the only person I'd mentioned it to. He'd bought groceries for elderly neighbors who were too proud to ask for help. He'd show up with bags of food," one old man said. "Always had some excuse. Said the store was having a sale and he'd bought too much. Said his church had given him extra from the food bank and he didn't want it to go to waste. Never let you say thank you. Just left the bags and went on his way. All of it done in secret, all of it from a salary that should barely have covered his own expenses. That's where the money went. Not into investments initially, into people. And only later, once his investments through his work started producing returns, once the compound interest began working its magic, did he stop giving everything away and start saving everything for me? Saving it for the moment he somehow knew would come. The moment when I'd need it most. I bought the old plastics factory property. It took a chunk of the inheritance, but not so much that I'd feel it. $200,000 for the land and the building, another $300,000 for renovation. Numbers that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Numbers that would have solved every problem I'd had. Now they were just numbers, tools to build something that mattered. The factory had been abandoned for 3 years, windows broken, floors buckled, the smell of chemicals and decay thick in the air. I walked through it with the architect, stepping over debris, listening to her vision. The production floor would become a community space, room for classes and meetings. The old offices would be converted to private consultation rooms where people could meet with lawyers and advocates. The break room would become an actual break room, with coffee and comfortable chairs and a bulletin board for resources. "Are you sure about this?" the architect asked, looking around at the wreckage. "It's a lot of work, a lot of money. You could do something easier." "My uncle worked here for 37 years, I said. "He stood on these floors, breathed this air, gave his best years to this place. If there's anywhere his name should be, it's here." Then I hired architects and contractors and started building something my uncle would have loved. Not a monument, a tool. A place where people could learn what I'd had to learn the hard way. How to protect yourself when the system fails. How to recognize financial abuse. How to get help when your own family is hurting you. Marcus helped. He was there almost every day during construction, wearing jeans and work boots, helping haul debris, painting walls, installing shelves. We didn't talk much during those days, just worked side by side, building something good out of our shared trauma, turning pain into purpose. "My mom would have loved this," he said one afternoon, standing in what would become the main classroom. "She always said the worst part of what happened wasn't losing the money. It was feeling stupid, feeling like she should have known better. A place like this, it tells people they're not stupid. They're victims. There's a difference." The construction took 4 months. 4 months of permits and inspections and unexpected problems. 4 months of watching something broken become something whole. 4 months of healing that had nothing to do with buildings and everything to do with purpose. The statistics are brutal. During the pandemic, research showed abuse increased to 1 in 5 seniors. 1 in 5. People over 60 being robbed, manipulated, stolen from by the children they raised, the spouses they trusted, the families they built, and losses increased 11% from the previous year. 11% more people discovering that the nest egg they'd built for 40 years was gone. That the house they'd paid off had been refinanced without their knowledge. That the retirement they'd planned was stolen by someone who called them mom or grandpa or honey. Most of them never report it because they're ashamed. Because admitting your own child stole from you feels like admitting you failed as a parent. Because the system makes it so hard to prosecute family members that most victims give up before they start. Because even when you report it, even when you have proof, the police and prosecutors shrug and say it's a civil matter too complicated, he said. She said, and wouldn't you rather just work it out within the family? The center will teach people what to look for. Red flags and power of attorney agreements. How to structure accounts so no one person has total control. What documentation to keep. Who to call when you suspect abuse. How to report to agencies that might actually help. How to find lawyers who specialize in elder abuse. How to protect yourself before it's too late. And it will be free. Completely free. Because my uncle taught me that love is what you do when nobody's watching. Love is living in a rented room so someone else can have a future. Love is arguing with someone because you see their blind spots even when it costs you their company. Love is making sure that when you're gone, the people you care about know they weren't forgotten. The center opened 6 months after that day in the bank. 6 months of construction and planning and paperwork. 6 months of transforming a broken-down factory into something that could help people. 6 months of purpose that made me feel more alive than I'd felt in years. The ribbon cutting was on a Saturday morning in May. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a breeze that carried the smell of honeysuckle from the lot next door. We'd set up folding chairs on the newly paved parking lot, rows of them filling up with people I'd invited and people who'd just heard about it and wanted to come. Marcus came to the ribbon cutting, wearing a suit I'd never seen him in, looking uncomfortable and proud at the same time. My daughter stood beside me, holding my hand like she used to when she was little and scared. My sister drove in from North Carolina with her husband, arriving at 6 in the morning because she didn't want to miss a single moment. Neighbors who'd known my uncle filled the room. Old men in their Sunday best, and old women with tissues already in their hands. The local news sent a reporter. The mayor came, though I suspected it was more for the photo opportunity than genuine support. Representatives from Adult Protective Services were there, the same agency that had shrugged when I'd reported what my son had done. I'd invited them specifically. Wanted them to see what their failure had created. We unveiled a plaque with his name and his favorite Bible verse, the one he'd underlined 3 times in that Bible I still kept on my nightstand. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." I pulled the cloth away and there it was, brass and permanent, mounted beside the front door where everyone who entered would see it. James Michael Porter Community Center for Financial Protection and Elder Advocacy. Below his name, his dates. Below that, the verse. And below that, in smaller letters, "Built by love that transcends death." The applause was scattered at first, then growing, then filling the parking lot. I stood there with tears running down my face, not bothering to wipe them away. Let them see. Let them see what grief and gratitude look like when they're tangled so tight you can't separate them. I gave a speech. I'd written it the night before, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my uncle's Bible open beside me, trying to find words that would honor him and help others at the same time. I'd rewritten it 5 times, crumpled up 4 versions, finally settled on something that felt true. I talked about my uncle's life, his sacrifice, his quiet generosity that nobody knew about until after he was gone. Talked about how he'd lived in a rented room and worked a factory job for 37 years while secretly paying for kids to go to college, covering rent for struggling families, buying groceries for elderly neighbors. Talked about how he'd argued with me because he loved me enough to risk our relationship to tell me the truth. How we hadn't spoken for 2 months before he died, and how that silence had haunted me. I talked about the betrayal I'd survived. My own son stealing everything I had while I recovered from surgery. The house I lost. The accounts emptied. The credit cards opened in my name. The eviction notice on my refrigerator. The feeling of being completely alone at 41 years old with nowhere to go and no one to help. And I talked about how his gift had saved me. Not just the money, though the money had been the vehicle, but the message behind it. The proof that someone had loved me enough to plan for my survival. The evidence that I wasn't forgotten, wasn't worthless, wasn't deserving of what had been done to me. My uncle saw what I couldn't see, I told the crowd, my voice shaking but holding steady. He saw that my son was dangerous, that trusting him would destroy me. And when I chose not to listen, when I chose my son over his wisdom, my uncle still protected me. He protected me anyway. He made sure that when I hit bottom, I'd find wings I didn't know I had. I talked about the epidemic of elder abuse that nobody wants to acknowledge because it's easier to believe families are safe than to admit that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you are the ones who hurt you most. Gave them the statistics. 1 in 5 seniors. Losses increased 11% during the pandemic. Billions of dollars stolen by family members every year. And most of it never reported because the shame is too great, because admitting your own child robbed you feels like admitting you failed as a parent. This center exists because the system failed me, I said, looking directly at the representatives from Adult Protective Services. Because when I reported what happened, I was told it was a family matter, too complicated to prosecute, better handled in civil court. I was told to work it out within the family, as if the family wasn't the problem. This center exists to fill the gap that the system refuses to fill. To give people knowledge and resources and support. To tell them it's not their fault. To help them fight back. When I finished, an elderly woman approached me. She was crying. She said her grandson had taken everything from her bank account the month before. $73,000, gone. The police said it was a family matter. She thought she was the only one. Thought it was her fault for trusting him. I held her hand, and I told her what I wish someone had told me sooner. It's not your fault. You're not alone. And there are people who will fight for you. She was the first, but she wasn't the last. The center became what I'd hoped it would be. A place where people could tell their stories without shame. Where they could get real help instead of platitudes. Where they could learn to protect themselves and their assets before someone they trusted destroyed everything. My son and daughter-in-law heard about it, of course. They sent a letter through their lawyer, threatening to sue for defamation because I'd mentioned them by implication in public statements. I sent the letter to my lawyer, the one Marcus had connected me with, and he sent back a response so scathing their lawyer dropped the case immediately. They tried one more approach. An email from my son, just to me, no lawyer CC'd. He said he was sorry, said he'd made mistakes, said he wanted to rebuild our relationship, said family was important, and we should find a way past this. I read it 3 times, looked for sincerity, looked for real remorse, found only carefully crafted words designed to get what he wanted. I could almost hear his wife coaching him on what to write. I didn't respond. What was there to say? He was sorry he got caught. Sorry the money he'd stolen was gone. Sorry I'd found a way to survive despite his best efforts to leave me with nothing. But he wasn't sorry for what he'd done. Just sorry it hadn't worked. Months passed. The summer heat that had made everything slow down faded into fall, and fall into winter. I moved to the house near my sister in North Carolina, the craftsman with the porch and the garden plot. Started a new life in a new place at 41 years old, which felt impossibly young and impossibly old at the same time. My daughter visited often. We planted tomatoes in the garden. We cooked banana pudding layered with vanilla wafers using my mother's old recipe. We sat on the porch in the evenings and didn't talk about my son. There was nothing left to say about him. Marcus came for Thanksgiving. It had been his idea, actually. He called a week before the holiday, his voice tentative in a way I'd never heard before. "So my kids will be with their mother this year," he said. And I was thinking, if you're not busy, maybe we could, I don't know, do something. Together. Not like a date or anything, just, 2 people who don't want to eat turkey alone. I smiled at his awkwardness. This man who'd been so confident helping me fight legal battles was nervous about asking to spend a holiday together. "Marcus," I said gently, "I'd love to have you for Thanksgiving, and you don't have to be weird about it. We're friends. Friends have Thanksgiving together." "Right. Yes. Friends. That's what I meant." He sounded relieved. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself, and maybe wine. Definitely wine." My daughter brought her kids, 3 tornadoes of energy, who filled my new house with noise and chaos and joy. My sister came with her husband, driving in from 3 hours away, bringing her famous sweet potato casserole and stories about her neighbors. We filled the house with noise and laughter and the smell of turkey and dressing, with the sounds of children playing and adults talking over each other and the television playing football that nobody was really watching. Marcus fit in like he'd always been part of our family. He helped my brother-in-law fix a leaky faucet. He played cars with my grandson on the floor, making engine noises and not caring that he was wearing his nice pants. He listened to my sister's stories like they were the most fascinating things he'd ever heard. He carved the turkey with the careful precision of someone who'd done it many times before. At one point, I found him standing alone on the porch, looking out at the garden where fall vegetables were still growing. I brought him a beer and stood beside him. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Just thinking about my mom. She would have liked this. The noise, the chaos. She always said a house isn't a home unless it's full of people. My uncle used to say the same thing, said the only thing worse than a crowded table was an empty one." We stood there in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd learned that family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one you build from the wreckage of the one that broke you. Then my daughter-in-law called, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I was in the kitchen making pies when my phone rang. I saw her name on the screen and almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what excuse she'd have, what angle she'd try next. "Sarah," she said, and her voice was dripping with false warmth, the kind that's been practiced in front of a mirror.
I know things have been difficult between us, but it's Thanksgiving. Time for family to come together. We'd like to invite you to dinner at our house. It would mean so much to the kids, and to us. A fresh start. A mercy invitation. A mercy invitation. The words hung in the air like rotten fruit, like she was doing me a favor. Like I should be grateful to sit at the table with the people who'd robbed me blind. Like I should forget the stolen house, the emptied accounts, the credit cards in my name, the 18 months of systematic theft. All of it washed away by a turkey dinner and some forced conversation about gratitude. I looked around my kitchen, at the pies cooling on the counter, at the grocery list on the refrigerator, full of items for a meal I was cooking for people who actually cared about me. At the photo I'd hung on the wall, my uncle at my high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders. A mercy invitation, I repeated slowly, tasting the words. That's an interesting way to put it. We just want to move forward, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The past is the past. What matters is family. Don't you think it's time to forgive and forget? That's what Jesus would want. Jesus would want. There it was. The weaponization of faith. The implication that holding people accountable for theft was somehow unchristian. That boundaries were a failure of grace. That protecting yourself from people who'd proven they would hurt you was a sin. I thought about my uncle. Thought about his Bible with the underlined passages. Thought about the community center with his name on it. Thought about the life I was building, the peace I'd found, the family I'd chosen instead of the family I'd been stuck with. Thank you for the invitation, I said. I accept, and I'm bringing someone with me. Someone I think you know. Marcus sends his regards. He's looking forward to seeing you again. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Then, in a voice stripped of all warmth, that won't be necessary, perhaps another time. No, I think Thanksgiving is perfect. A time for family, like you said. And Marcus is family to me now. Family is the people who protect you, not the people who share your DNA. See you Thursday. What time should we arrive? She hung up without answering. I sat there with the phone in my hand and laughed until I cried. Not sad crying, not grief crying, joy crying. The kind of crying that comes from knowing you've won, not by being cruel, but by being clear. Marcus called an hour later. Did you really tell her I was coming to Thanksgiving? I really did. What did she say? She uninvited me, which was exactly what I expected. And exactly what I wanted. You're a little bit evil. I like that about you. My uncle would have liked it too. He was good at seeing through people's bullshit. I'm finally learning from him. We had our own Thanksgiving, better than any meal my son and his wife could have provided. The table was crowded, plates overlapping, elbows bumping, conversation flowing like water. My daughter's kids had made construction paper turkeys in school, and we'd taped them to the walls. My sister had brought her good china, the set she'd inherited from our grandmother. Marcus had insisted on bringing 3 kinds of wine because he wasn't sure what would pair with turkey. The food was imperfect. I'd overcooked the turkey slightly. My sister's sweet potato casserole was more marshmallow than potato. Marcus's store-bought rolls were still frozen in the middle. My daughter's cranberry sauce came straight from a can, ridges intact. None of it mattered. The food was just the excuse for the gathering. The real meal was the company. We went around the table and said what we were grateful for. My brother-in-law was grateful for his health, for making it another year. My sister was grateful for family, for having people to drive 3 hours to see. My daughter was grateful for her children. For me, for second chances. Her kids were grateful for dessert, which we all laughed about. When it came to Marcus, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm grateful for Sarah, he finally said, his voice rough. For giving me a chance to do something right. For letting me help. For teaching me that it's never too late to choose the right side. My throat tightened. I reached over and squeezed his hand. When it came to me, I looked around the table. at Marcus and my daughter and my sister and the children who were already fidgeting to leave the table, at faces that looked at me with love, with respect, with genuine care. No performance, no manipulation, just presence. I'm grateful for the people who choose to love me, I said slowly. Not because they have to, because they want to. I'm grateful for my uncle, who loved me enough to argue with me, who saw what I couldn't see, who protected me even when I pushed him away. I'm grateful for second chances, for new beginnings, for learning the difference between family by blood and family by choice. My daughter started crying, then my sister. Then we were all crying and laughing and passing napkins around the table like tissues. The children looked at us like we were crazy, which we probably were. Crazy with gratitude, crazy with relief. Crazy with the knowledge that we'd survived things that should have broken us and somehow come out stronger. And I was grateful for my uncle, for his sacrifice, for his foresight, for arguing with me when I needed to be argued with, for loving me even when I didn't listen, for making sure that when I hit bottom, I'd discover I had wings I didn't know existed. He's been gone just 18 months. But he saved my life 3 weeks into my darkest moment. He gave me more than money. He gave me proof that I mattered, that I was worth protecting, that someone had seen my future and cared enough to secure it. The money changed my circumstances, but the love changed my soul. Now, 1 year later, I stand in the community center that bears his name, and I watch people walk through the doors looking defeated and walk out looking armed. Armed with knowledge, with resources, with the understanding that they're not alone and it's not their fault, and there are ways to fight back even when the system fails them. I think about everyone out there who's going through what I went through, who's been betrayed by someone they trusted, who thinks they're alone, who doesn't know there might be help waiting if they just knew where to look. If you're listening to this and you're in that dark place, let me tell you what I learned. The people who truly love you will prove it with actions, not words. Sometimes that proof doesn't come until after they're gone. Sometimes it comes from unexpected places, from unlikely allies, from strangers who become family. But it comes. Document everything. Keep records. Don't let anyone have total control of your finances no matter how much you trust them. Get second opinions. Ask questions. And if something feels wrong, trust that feeling even if everyone around you says you're being paranoid. The statistics I mentioned earlier, they're not just numbers. They're people. They're mothers and fathers and grandparents who worked their whole lives only to have it stolen by someone who called them family. During the pandemic, research showed abuse increased to 1 in 5 seniors. Losses increased 11% from the previous year. That's thousands and thousands of people, just in our country, losing everything to family members who saw them as opportunities instead of obligations. You can protect yourself. You can fight back. And if you can't fight alone, find people who will fight with you. They exist. I promise you they exist. As for my son and daughter-in-law, I hear things occasionally. They're struggling financially, made bad investments, living beyond their means. Part of me, the part that gave birth to him and loved him first, wants to help. But the part that my uncle taught, the part that learned to see clearly, knows better. Some people need to face the consequences of their choices. Some people will only change when they hit their own bottom. I'm not their safety net. I'm not their backup plan. I'm not their mercy invitation. I'm a woman who was saved by love that transcended death. A woman who learned that family is what you build, not what you're born into. A woman who knows that the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's knowing someone believed in you enough to plan for your survival. My uncle died with 3 shirts and a rented room, but he left me everything that mattered. And every time I walk into that community center, every time I help someone else escape the trap I nearly died in, I honor his memory. Not with tears, with action. That's his real legacy. Not the money, the multiplication, One person protecting another, an endless chain of love that refuses to die just because someone's heart stopped beating. So where are you listening from? What's your story? Have you been where I've been? Are you there now? What would you have done in my place? If this story reached you, if it meant something, let me know. Hit like if you understand what it means to be saved by someone who's gone. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. Stories about survival and salvation and the complicated truth about family. Comment with your own experience or just to say you were here, you listened, you understand. Because that's how we break the silence around elder abuse. That's how we help each other survive. Not by pretending family is always safe, by admitting when it's not, by building new families from the people who prove their love with protection, not performance. My uncle used to say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." I understand now what he meant. Not that God provides everything we want, but that real love makes sure we have everything we need, even when it costs everything, even when we don't deserve it, even from beyond the grave. That's the inheritance that matters, and that's the inheritance I'm passing on.